We saw examples that Satya showed us, but those are examples. Now we actually want to have a conversation with somebody who's built this out, and I invite Spandana to take over, walk us through this.
Thanks, Arish. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining in. I have the Air India team with us. We have Viju and Prateek from Air India. Thank you so much for coming in, Viju. Before we start talking about, why did we go for this plugin, why the scenario, I would just like to give a glimpse of the plugin that has been built by Air India, one of the flagship carriers from India that we have. It's a beautiful plugin that is integrating with their flight operations database. And let's just look at a video snippet, which can probably give some more idea on how it works. Yeah, so basically, we have this particular flight ops database with Air India, and it has been integrated with the M365 Copilot. If you look at the questions that we are asking over here, there are various questions that the CXOs and leadership within Air India are interested to know when it comes to flight performance, like how many flights are delayed by these many minutes, from which airport, what were the reasons of delays. So just querying all of this information, having these information handy when they are accessing Copilot just makes this so much more easier to consume and get access to all those information which may be available today in different dashboards or reports outside of M365 apps. So like you see over here, you get a entire list of the question over here was to check for flights which have been delayed for more than 60 minutes in the past month. We can see a list of flights from which airport, what was the departure time, what was the delay. We see that list coming up beautifully over here. And obviously, we can take quick actions from the responses that Copilot is giving. So you can actually spin off a chat with the airport manager to understand more on what was the reason of delays. You can view obviously more details. You can go inside this particular line item and understand, get more information about this delay that may have happened. Um, just going over here to another snippet that I have. Another interesting thing that I wanted to point out over here is that Copilot is able to identify what were the most common reasons of delay. Like you see over here, whenever a delay is greater than 10 minutes, can you tell me the top most common reasons of delay? So these are those reasoning, the text reasoning that Copilot LLM does once it gets back the response from the APIs from their operations database. And we can also ask Copilot to draft an email based on this, if it comes up. I think I'm missing out on that piece. But we can actually ask Copilot to draft an email response basis the delay reasons that have come up. And Copilot does a beautiful job of comparing the delay reasons with, if an SOP document has been shared, then Copilot does that reasoning and brings out an, email response that can be sent out to the airport managers to understand what are those proactive measures. Oh, yes, I have it now. Can you please draft an email summarizing the above information? And this needs to be shared with airport managers. What are the proactive measures that needs to be taken? So that sort of email, drafting, text drafting generation is being done by Copilot basis the information that it has access to. But without any more delay, we have the Air India team over here to talk about how did they, kind of finalize this particular scenario to go ahead with, what are their plans, what has been the experience. So we have Viju, who's the head of digital architecture, vice president at Air India. He has an exceptional experience of 25 plus years, spanning data platforms, AI, analytics, cloud, and is focusing on advancing tech platforms within Air India, focusing on LLM and conversational AI. And we also have Prateek, who's a digital architect with his team and who's also focusing on, building more on LLMs and conversational AI. So thank you so much. And yeah, Viju, just a quick question to get started with. What was the motivation, or what did you want to achieve when Air India decided to go ahead with this particular plugin scenario? What is it that you had in mind when you decided to build a Copilot plugin?
Sure. First of all, thanks, Pantana and Microsoft team for this opportunity to share our experience. So first and foremost, like Microsoft Teams is our collaboration platform, right? So anything what we built within the enterprise, if you would want like a quick adoption, it is really quick on Teams, right? If I'm able to integrate it on Teams, because all our different departments, especially the knowledge workers, are always on Teams, like collaborating and like communicating on Teams. So we would want to leverage that same platform. So that was like the one of the key motivation of building this. And like from within Teams, if I'm able to like go fetch my organizational data and then in an intelligent way, like produce responses, and then I'm able to like take action on the fly, right? As an example which you have seen shown, right? Email to the airport manager on the recent, right? So these were like some of our motivation to build the Copilot plugin on M365 on Teams.
Yeah, I think you just mentioned a great point that Teams is where, your information workers are actually communicating and collaborating with each other. So it makes so much sense to bring information into the same platform so they're not going anywhere else. And Copilot, Microsoft 365 Copilot provides that one single chat interface where they can get information from not just the M365 apps, but also any in-house, line of business applications or database that you may be using. I think that's a
Yes.
great reason. Um, the other question that sort of kind of follows up is basically why this scenario, why the flight operations scenario? Was it a high priority one? But how did you kind of narrow down on this particular scenario?
Okay. So on-time performance, or in general, like we use OTP, is an important KPI, right, for us, or like for any airline for that matter, right? This is tracked right from like the compliance agencies like DGCA. Our board tracks this. Our CEO's office tracks this. All department heads are measured on this KPI, right? How they are contributing to this KPI. One reason of this KPI is like this is a very quantitative measure. Like people really look forward when it comes to an airline. So since this KPI is so important, right, for our top management and like for our customers, right? We wanted to start with this, right? Every department is interested in this. Every department head is interested in this on-time
Yeah.
performance current, right? So that was like one of our the reason why we started with like on-time performance.
Beautiful. So what I hear is that this is one of the top information which is requested or checked by your exec leadership, and also a regulatory or compliance requirement for the industry, which is why it is so high in priority. And obviously it spans across user personas. It's something that is being tracked by department heads and not just by a few user groups, which makes complete sense. We should always go for a plugin which is obviously relevant for the most number of users, and it's a high priority, frequently used sort of a scenario or data that they need access to. Makes complete sense. Thanks for sharing that, Viju. Um, my next question would be, after identifying the scenario, and now that the plugin is sort of deployed and tested by a few users, what was the effort that you had to put in? How big was the Air India team that was working on it? How much time, weeks, days did it take for you? Yeah, I would just want to
Sure.
understand your
So,
experience
so
on that.
Sure. So I'll have Pratik talk about it, like because he was like closely associated with the team, right? Yeah. Pratik.
I get it. So I would say from a development perspective, broadly speaking, there are two aspects to building a Copilot plugin using the SDK route right now. So one aspect is the Teams messaging extension development in itself, where like developers need to get familiar with things like adaptive cards, and a bit of bot framework knowledge would also help. And
Yeah.
also in general, getting familiar with the whole landscape of Teams development, like how to use the Teams toolkit and how to sideload Teams apps to for local development and all of that, right? So apart from that, to go live on a tenant level, what are the things that are a part of that? So that's one part of it, the Teams messaging extension development. The other is interfacing this messaging extension with the M365 Copilot. So these two work hand in hand to finally make the Copilot plugin, right? So on the integration with the M365 Copilot side, I would say that a bit of familiarity with the prompt engineering, a high-level idea on how LLMs work, how does the manifest and the responses that the messaging extension get used by Copilot to give better answers. So these are, I would say, the key aspects. And for the plugin that you saw just now, we had a team of three, one PMO, two developers. And it took us about a week for us to go to production with the first version. And I'd say that this was possible from the great support that we received from the Microsoft team. They quickly understood our background, and they brought us up to speed on what would be required to hit the ground running for us. And we didn't have to waste a lot of time because of this with all the trial and error. And we got a lot of early feedback on how to shape and design this plugin. So yeah, like shout out to the Microsoft team for this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prateek. Thanks for the call out. But I think 1 week is like a record time to go from designing to deployment, at least the MVP version for the plugin. That's just great. So great to hear. Um, and I understand that what I understand is that we need some sort of, the starting point over here is to basically understand the team's platform capabilities. Like, what is a messaging extension? What is an adaptive card? How do you want the response to show up, once the user has queried for some information? Those are something which is already been existing as a part of Teams platform. Once we have that kind of a knowledge, it becomes pretty simple to kind of do the prompt engineering or understand how the manifest is going to call up the relevant APIs from your database. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And it's been a great partnership, I would say, with Air India to build one of the first Copilot plugins which went live in India. Thank you so much for that. I have one last question, Viju, which is that now that you have experienced the plugin, you have had a few rounds of testing done with it. What has been the feedback? What do you plan? How do you plan to take this ahead or scale or bring more use cases? Any early thoughts on that would be great.
Sure. So, matter of fact, like we have around like 10 to 12 use cases identified and is in our pipeline to build plugin, within different departments, right? Uh, Also, like, we plan to extend this OTP plugin like with other different perspectives, right? As I said, OTP is like a measure which like most of the departments are interested in one way or other. But, everyone would have like, their will require their perspective and their contribution, and they will have their own specific, or they will require their own specific views for on the OTP. So we are extending this plugin, right? That is one. Then like around like 10 to 12 different use cases are identified. I will take one example and explain, right? One of our team, like within Air India, that's the revenue management. They are responsible for ensuring the revenue of each and every aircraft. Like in our terminology, we call it as every tail, right? So this team normally, the scale at which they can work is like around 4, 5. tails will be assigned to an analyst, and they'll be tracking how much booking they are getting, right? We have like further details around like the complexities involved, but generally like 4 5 tails are like taken care by one user. So with the plugin, we expect that they should be able to like go ahead and support like probably 20 25 days, right? Especially like when we have like plans of like expanding our fleet, right? So as and when like new aircrafts come, we don't need to scale out that team, right? They can use the tool because their the kind of analytics they need is like more or less fixed, but the certain combinations are required, and which is like a very perfect tool, like to be built as a Copilot plugin from Teams. Right.
Great. I think we already have the next scenario in place for Air India with revenue management. Yeah, that's a great use case. It is basically improving efficiencies of your team who's already taking care of, who's already looking at bookings and revenues, as you mentioned. Yeah, that's a great one. And I think we can take it up as our next plugin for Air India. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Viju. As always, it's a great pleasure and a great partnership to work with the Air India team, and we'll continue to collaborate more so that Air India gets more and more value out of the Copilot investments that
Sure.
they have
Thank
done.
you. Thanks a lot, like for all the support and collaboration. Thank you, Ekta.
Thanks, thanks, Viju. Thanks, Prateek.